So ordered.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 4 minutes to the gentleman from Maine, Mr. Poliquin.
Gentleman from Maine is recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, very much for bringing this, helping bring this very important bill to the floor. And I'd also like to thank Chairman Rob Bishop from Utah, who also was very instrumental in bringing this bill to the floor. And in addition to that, I want to thank all of the staff members of the Natural Resources Committee here of the House for all their great work. This is so important to our state. Now, Maine, Mr. Chairman, Maine, the great state of Maine, is called vacation land. Now, we have a population just of 1.3 million hardy souls in Maine. However, every year, our population swells to about 40 million vacationers from all over the world. And you know, we have such a stunning natural beauty in Maine, in a pristine natural environment, and all these welcoming small towns. It's no wonder that people flock to Maine. Now, right smack in the middle of Mid-Coast Maine is our crown jewel called Acadia National Park. And we just love Acadia National Park in Maine. We are so proud of this. If you happen to vacation in Maine, if you haven't, Mr. Chairman, you deserve your family, and you deserve a vacation to Maine. But if you drive up to Cadillac Mountain, you see this panoramic view of Penobscot Bay. And coming out of those sparkling waters of the Atlantic are these green-topped islands. And then you might rent a bike, Mr. Chairman, and go to these terrific groomed historic carriage trails that wind through the woods of Acadia. And take your kids down to Sand Beach, Mr. Chairman, right in Acadia National Park, and when their toes hit that ice-cold water, they shriek with joy. This is Maine. We are very proud of Acadia National Park. Now, Mr. Chairman, I do have to tell you that a couple years ago, unfortunately, Acadia National Park expanded beyond its boundaries. And this is because there was conflict in a couple laws that date back quite some time. Now, I am very happy that my bill, with great help from my fellow member of Congress, Congresswoman Shelley Pingree from the 1st District worked on, but I'm very proud that my bill clarifies this boundary for Acadia National Park. It also closes a few loopholes, but still allows the boundaries to be adjusted in very minor ways with abutting pieces of property. Now, I made it clear, Mr. Chairman, that I would not sign on to this boundary clarification issue until one more thing is done, and that's protect the livelihoods of hundreds and hundreds of hardworking Mainers who harvest bloodworms, sandworms, clams, and periwinkles along the mudflats around Acadia National Park. Now, for those folks who visit Maine from Utah or Kansas, and you spend a lot of money on vacation in Maine, and you expect to see the great ocean in front of you, Mr. Chairman, but because the moon revolves around the Earth and the gravitational pull of the moon causes one of the unique things in Maine, we have big tides. So if you're vacationing in Maine and you find out when you wake up in the morning the water is gone, don't worry about it. 6 hours later, it will come back. Now, the ebb and the flow of the tides in Maine along the coastline creates what we call the intertidal zone. It is a zone between the high water mark and the low water mark. Now, in the state of Maine, we are very clear that this land is owned by the people of Maine, not by the federal government. So I was alarmed a couple years ago when some of the wormers called me up and said, Mr. Poliquin, we worked an entire tide and someone from Acadia National Park didn't understand the rules and asked us to turn over our bucket. Now, we have hundreds and hundreds of families that rely on harvesting in the intertidal zone, and we had to make sure that we corrected this problem. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it.
Additional 2 minutes.
Now, this is a clear example of what we call the public trust document. This common law document, which we adopted from the British ancestors, gives public access to this land between high and low water lines for the purpose of, and I quote, fishing, fouling, and navigation. Now, unlike most states, in some states, Mr. Chairman, some property owners in Maine own to the low water mark of the tidal range, so this doctrine is incredibly important for the public to have access to our flats for these purposes. This bill that we are passing today codifies the unique ownership and public access rights of Maine fishermen on the intertidal that have worked on this for hundreds of years. Traditional harvesting is meant to include the harvesting of clams and worms, which are harvested by hand with a rake at low tide, and the collection of periwinkles. It also includes accessing the intertidal areas by boat at all tides for the purpose of harvesting these species. Now, to be clear, the intent of this bill is for traditional harvesting, quote unquote. Now, by doing so, this will ensure that our wormers and clammers and others that live in the area will continue to be able to do what they've been doing for many, many years. Mr. Chairman, I want to congratulate again Shelley Pingree, my compatriot from the 1st District, who did a great job on this, our staffs, the staff of the Natural Resources Committee, and we extended ourselves, Mr. Chairman, in a bipartisan way to all the stakeholders in the area, including the Acadia Advisory Commission, the Maine Marine Worm Harvesters, the Maine Clammers Association, the National Park Service, the Friends of Acadia, and all those who want to make this right for the boundary of Acadia National Park forever to be cemented in law, and at the same time, we protect the livelihood of some of the hardest working people you will ever find in this country, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, these individuals will rake and dig for these worms in the summertime, in hot weather, in the wintertime when the snow is blowing sideways. I yield back. Thank you very much, and I encourage everybody to vote for this bill. Thank